They said no one escapes the Alpha King alive, but that night I did, or at least I believed I had for the length of one breath that tasted like iron and rain and the old ache of prayers that never reached the moon. The palace fell away behind me like a dream that had finally confessed its cruelty. I ran barefoot, silk torn to ribbons around my thighs, the cold turning my skin to glass. The lawn gave way to wild earth, to wet grass and bracken slick with dew, to thorns that insisted on a toll of blood. I paid and kept moving. Every step was a choice stitched against terror. Every exhale smoked the air like a signal fire that begged the dark to swallow me whole. The eastern watchtower bell tolled once, like a heartbeat dragged across a blade. Someone would read my absence in the way the silence shifted in corridors, in a cup left warm on a table, in a door that refused to creak because it had learned my footsteps. The palace knew me, the way cages know the wings that scrape them. It would tell him. He would listen. He always listened. I cut left where the orchard met the wall because I knew the gardeners slept heavy after late harvest, their hands still closing in dreams around phantom fruit. I had memorized the rhythm of their snores on nights when sleep would not come, when the moon bled through the shutters and his scent flooded my lungs, and I pressed my palm against the mark on my collarbone and promised myself I would not cry again. The gate was low here. The ivy held it like an old scar. I had loosened the hinge with kitchen oil and patience during afternoons when ladies-in-waiting cooed over new fabrics, and I smiled with the small, polite smile I had practiced for mirrors. Tonight the hinge did not complain. The gate opened one finger width at a time, and the night reached in as if to cup my jaw. "Come," the wind said. "Come, little Luna. Come if you dare." I dared. On the other side was the world I had been told to fear. A world with teeth and hunger and men who did not bow to crowns. The stories were full of what the forest did to pretty girls who wandered from their courtyards. The stories did not include girls like me, who had been born under a cruel red moon and marked at 13 by a prayer that was less a blessing than a verdict. When I crossed into bramble and shadow, cold stung my ankles. Mud embraced me up to the arch of my feet. A branch dragged across my upper arm, and I hissed and kept running. Breathe. Count. Do not look back. I counted to 5 in time with my heart and then to 10 because fear hates numbers that hold steady. The forest exhaled sap and moss and something metallic beneath the sweetness. The path I had chosen was not a path so much as a memory of one, the old game trail the Alpha King had shown me from a balcony once, pointing with a gloved hand as if he were teaching me the constellation of my future. The game trail ran west toward cliffs cut by the river. In daylight, the river looked like braided silk. At night it looked like a throat. I would cross it anyway. A fox screamed somewhere to my right, the sound like a violin string breaking. I flinched, then forced my shoulders down from my ears. The rhythm of my breath grew ragged, and my mind tried to carry my body faster than it could follow. I had never been allowed to run this far when I was a girl. My nursemaids called running unseemly. Queens glided. Queens did not reach for the horizon with fists clenched, mouth open, hair a black banner. Queens did not bolt like deer with wolves at their heels. Perhaps I was not a queen at all. Perhaps I had only been a price paid to peace. The first time I met him, the world had smelled like storm-charged air. I remember the roar of his people greeting him as he rode in from the north, the way even the horses seemed compulsory in their devotion. He moved like a secret that did not care if it was discovered. They called him the Alpha King, but titles slide off men like him. He was inevitability carved into a shape that made your blood remember you were made of night. When his eyes found me across the hall, the music faltered, just a thread, just enough for me to hear my own name inside my head as if he had said it without moving his mouth. Serafina. After that there were vows and wine and a veil that tasted like salt because I could not stop weeping. After that there was his hand over mine, steady as winter, as we pressed palm to altar and the moon lowered itself like a benediction. After that there was the burn of the mark searing through skin, a star unfurling its fire beneath my collarbone, and his breath at my ear saying mine not as an order but as a prophecy that the night itself had written. The wind changed. The hairs on my arms rose. I stopped so abruptly the earth slid out from under me. Pine needles bit my knees through torn silk. I lay very still, the way prey lays still, and listened. At first there was only the rush of river far ahead and the busy whisper of leaves as if gossiping about the girl who had finally done it. Then I heard it, the sound of the forest deciding to be quiet. Birds swallowed their words. Mice reconsidered their errands. The air grew heavier by a degree too fine for human language. But my body knew. The bond I despised and owed my life to knew. The bond turned toward heat like a flower. He was in the trees. I had told myself he would send hunters. Commanders. A pack that moved with a single mind and 1,000 teeth. I had not let myself imagine he would come himself because that was a thought with claws. And yet, somewhere to my left, bark scraped underweight and the smallest breath of laughter found me, low and indulgent and familiar enough to unthread my knees. Run, little Luna, something warm purred along the seam of the mark that bound us. Run, if you must. It will keep you warm until I arrive. I stood. My legs were songs I had not practiced. I moved them anyway. My pulse tried to spill out of my mouth. He would not shift, I told myself. He would not waste the change on something as simple as this. He would walk like a prince through his forest, boots clean, coat uncreased, and when he found me, he would look at me the way fire looks at wood. The way winter looks at fields. Water, I told myself. Get to the water. He could track me through blood, through breath, through the memory of my footsteps stamped in the earth. But water would argue with the truth for a little while. I would need only a little while. There was a ferry on the far bank, a ferryman who traded passage for secrets whispered against his shoulder. I had tucked my secret in a locket inside my bodice, the locket warm now against skin. A coin stamped with a wolf's head given to me by the old apothecary who had bandaged my hands when I broke a porcelain cup because my fingers would not stop shaking. Show him this, she had said, and say that Ruth sent you. The ferryman owes me one debt and one promise. It will be enough. I ran. The ground tipped and swayed like a drunk. I nearly fell twice and did fall once, catching myself with my palms and sliding, mud swallowing me to the wrist. A root jabbed my ribs. I made a sound I did not recognize and bit it off, because sound is a lantern to anything that hunts by night. When I stood, my dress was heavier. That would slow me. I tore another strip from the hem and left it hanging like surrender from a thorn. Better he think I was breaking. Better he taste my desperation and believe it would finish me before he did. Downhill steepened. The river's voice rose from murmur to argument to thunder. Spray reached the leaves and made them glitter with the rumor of dawn. The sky was not even close to lightening. The moon had buried her face in gauze. I thought of her the way I did when I used to fall asleep in the nursery with the window cracked just enough to feel her on my cheeks. I used to think she watched me because she loved me. Later, when the mark seared, I understood she watched me because I was her work. At the incline's base the trees parted as if pulled aside by invisible hands. The river unrolled dark and vast, muscles flexing under skin. The current dragged whole islands of foam downstream like careless gods might drag ruined cities. In the middle, black water hesitated around a rock with a patient shoulder. On the F.A.R. bank, lanterns blinked. The ferry. The promise that the world was larger than the palace that had taught me to make myself small. I stumbled to the edge, stones grinding under my heels. Cold rose and took my breath the way fingers take a throat. I waded in and the shock made my bones ring, a bell under flesh. I swallowed a cry because the river does not care if we are brave, it only requires we are silent. The hem that had slowed me now tried to drown me. I unhooked the bodice with numb fingers and stripped silk from skin, each movement clumsy as a confession. The locket swung and slapped my sternum. If I lost it here I would lose everything. I twisted the chain twice around my palm until it cut. The current seized my thighs and laughed. I took another step and the earth refused to be where I left it. My feet skittered on smooth stones. My shins kissed the river's teeth. The current had weight, more than a man, more than a promise. It bullied me sideways, and I let it, angling toward the eddy behind the rock like a prayer angles itself toward mercy. If I could rest there for a breath, just one, I could gather myself and push for the far bank. Branches snapped behind me. I did not turn. The worst thing about fear is the way it begs for proof. I had all the proof I needed. His scent traveled over the water like heat. Clean, cold, a promise written in iron. Pine and something more ancient, something that remembered running long before there were names for it. The mark on my skin warmed as if it could embarrass me into obedience. Serafina. I hated the way my name tasted when he said it. I hated the way it softened at the edges, the way it became a vowel. I hated the way my knees wanted to bend. Do not, I whispered to myself. The river did not care for whispers. It shoved and I shoved back, teeth bared. My fingers found the lip of the rock. I hauled my body into the eddy until the water relinquished me with sulky hands. For a heartbeat I lay with my cheek against wet stone and let the cold sink its fingers to my spine. The ferryman's lanterns bobbed across the black like will-o'-the-wisps. I opened my mouth to call and swallowed river instead. A shadow separated from the trees. He did not shift. He did not need to. His power moved ahead of him like weather, adjusting the world to fit. He came down the bank like a man who had never considered falling. Boots, dark trousers, coat open, shirt unlaced at the throat as if he had dressed between one breath and the next. Hair damp with the sweat of the run or the mist of the river, I could not tell. His eyes held moonlight until moonlight looked away. He paused at the water's lip and smiled without showing teeth. He had 1,000 ways to smile. I had collected them the way children collect shells. His one meant indulgence. This one meant you will fail and I will forgive you because I am merciful to the pieces that belong to me. Come back, he said. My body tried to answer. I told it no. My voice refused me anyway. It stayed like a frightened bird in my ribs. I licked water from my lips and shook my head. The lanterns on the far bank rocked. Someone called, soft, a question shaped like my name the way strangers shape it when told by someone who does not know how it feels in their mouth. The ferryman. He saw me. He would come. The Alpha King stepped into the river. The water made a sound as if it recognized him. He crossed 3 paces before the current remembered its pride and pushed. He took another step, placed a hand on a submerged boulder as if greeting an old friend, and looked up at me with an expression I could not bear to wear inside my skin. Serafina, he said again, less a command than an invocation. The water is cruel in spring. It will take you the way men take legends, first by the throat, then by the story of you. He tilted his head. Come back. I forced my tongue to unlock. No. He blinked as if I had surprised him with a trick he liked. Then I will come to you, he said simply. He came to me. The river threw itself in his way, and he walked through it the way hunger walks through a room full of bread. He did not hurry. He did not need to. He came with absolute faith in the end of the story, the end he had written in the ink of my blood the night the mark burned. I scrambled to my knees, found purchase on the rock with raw palms, and pushed off into the current again, because a moving target is prey but a still target is a confession. Cold slammed me back under. The river filled my ears with its voice until it sounded like all the lullabies my mother never sang. My chest burned, elegant and instructive. I kicked and clawed and found the slick of a stone with my toes and shoved off again. Air hammered back into me when I surfaced. I coughed and turned my head and saw the far bank closer now. The lantern swayed like patient eyes. The ferryman's boat knocked against its rope like a restless horse. I could make it. I could. Fingers closed around my wrist. Not cruel. Not yet. Firm, the way hands are when they are reminding you that you are a shape that fits inside them. Heat traveled from his skin into mine until the cold seemed like a childish tantrum. I hated that relief broke me first. I hated that a sob crawled up my throat even as I twisted and struck at him with my free hand, knuckles catching his jaw. His head turned a fraction. He did not loosen his grip. His mouth quirked, not with amusement, but with something that looked too near grief. Little Luna, he said softly over the river's snarl. Do not bruise your own bones against me. Let me go, I managed. The chain cut my palm where the locket wrapped, an anchor to pain I could own. Let me go. If I let you go, he said, and the sound of it made the river seem cheap, who will keep you warm when you insist on freezing? He drew me closer. It was not a jerk, not a warrior's theft, but a steady reel as if I were a net full of something he had waited his whole life to eat. I braced my feet against the river's insistence and dragged everything I had left into resistance. His fingers slid from wrist to forearm, wrapping, not to harm but to claim. Fire spilled from the mark along 1,000 bright nerves. He was not using it. He did not need to. Proximity woke it like a sleeping animal that knew the smell of home. This is not home, I said aloud to the skin of my own arm as if it might listen. What is? He asked, as if I had spoken to him. Not you. He smiled with only one corner of his mouth, and it was a wound. You used to whisper my name in your sleep as if it were a door you could open and walk through to find yourself. I used to be sick, I said, though the words came out thin as frost. Then let me be your cure. He closed the last distance and gathered me. There was no spectacle in it. No triumph flung at the sky. Just the inevitability of tide meeting shore. His coat brushed my bare shoulders. He must have shrugged it off and swung it around me at the same breath without my noticing. Warmth staggered me. I could not stop the sound I made against his throat, something between a whimper and a curse. He held me the way a man holds a relic stolen from a fire. I pressed my palms against his chest to make space between us and found space a lie. I pushed. He allowed the inch as if granting a favor. Serafina, he said, and the river seemed to listen. Do not say my name like that. As if it belongs to me, he asked. Or to you? To me, I said. To me. He nodded slowly, as if considering new doctrine. The current leaned its full weight against his calves. He shifted us to the rock's lee, set my feet on something that did not move, and let my wrist go. My skin sang where his fingers left it, a song I wanted to forget. He lifted his hands a fraction, palms open, as if easing a skittish creature. He had never done that before. He had never asked. Not with words, not with gesture. He had always been gravity, and I had been the high thing that fell. You mean to hate me, he said quietly. You have practiced it the way you practiced your scales at the piano. Left hand first, then right, until your fingers knew the shape of loathing without thinking. I do not loathe you, I said. I fear you. The truth surprised both of us. His eyes flickered. Mine filled. Fear is a kind of war. Chip, he said. I would rather you choose another. I chose the river. The river is not a man, he said, and for the first time a thread of something like annoyance colored his voice. The river will not wear your grief and spit out your joy polished. It will only take. So do you, I said, and I was proud of the way my voice did not crack even as a shiver moved from my shoulder blades to my tongue. You take and call it fate as if the word absolves you. He flinched like I had slammed a door. I call it what it is because lying does not make the night love us more. Then let the night have me, I said. Let it have me and spare me your mercy. We stood in the noise and the cold and the thin, taut wire of what we had learned to call a marriage. The lanterns on the far bank steadied, as if the ferryman had decided to watch rather than move. I thought absurdly of tea steam curling in a quiet room. I thought of bread torn by hands that did not shake. I thought of sleep. I thought of his mouth close to my ear the night we wed, saying mine as if he were kneeling to the altar of me and not the other way around. He took a breath, and the sound of it was so human it made something inside me tilt. You saw the ledger, he said. The sentence hung there, naked. He did not dress it with denial. I closed my eyes and saw columns of names, red ink threaded like vein through black. Villages moved, not evacuated as the scribe's careful hand claimed, but culled. Wolves do not need farmland, kings do not need descent. I had not meant to see it. I had been looking for the treaty with the Southern Coven because a girl is allowed to play queen if she does it with a key light and a script. I found the pages still damp. I found signatures that looked like bruises. And then I found him in the doorway reading me reading him, and the look on his face was not guilt. It was not even pride. It was certainty. I did, I said. And you believed the worst of me. No accusation. Just fact, as if he were reciting the phases of the moon. I believed the truth, I whispered. He made a soft sound in his throat that was almost a laugh and almost a wound. The truth, he said. Do you want mine? No. He nodded again, as if I had done well. Then keep yours, he said gently. Hold it to your chest and let it warm you when you wake in the night and reach for me and hate yourself for the way your hand remembers the map of me. I will not, I said, but the protest was a candle struggling in wind. He stepped closer, just enough that the world narrowed to breath and the smell of him, pine, smoke, steel just beginning to rust, and the faint metallic sweetness that came after his wolf ran where no one could see. The river is not the only thing here that would drow. WNU, he murmured. You pretend I am the flood. Sometimes I am only the shore. Then be still and let me pass. He lifted his hand. For a moment I thought he would touch my face, thumb the water from my mouth the way he had once thumbed tears from the corner of my eye after a council session where a duke had called me girl as if the word were a leash. He did not. He reached past me and caught the chain that bound the locket to my palm. His fingers brushed my knuckles, deliberate as bells. He glanced down at the coin when I opened my hand. Wolf's head, old mint, debt and promise forged into a single glare. You would have crossed, he said. Not a question. Yes. With this. Yes. He considered the coin as if it were an animal that might bite. Ruth still collects favors, then, he said softly, as if we were at a dinner and he had discovered they had served his mother's soup. Good. It is good that she lives. The admission toyed with my balance. You know her. I know the names of anyone who kept you alive before you were mine, he said, almost absent-minded, eyes still on the coin. Does that frighten you? It should not. My enemy is the thing that would end you, Serafina. His eyes rose to mine. Even if you believe it is me. You cornered them, I said. The villages. I moved them from wolves that do not wear crowns, he said. From rogues who had already taken what they wanted and would take the rest when the snow came and hunger learned to beg. I moved them where my men could keep watch. I signed with red because black on black disappears. He paused. And because it allows people who wish to hate me to pretend they have found proof. The river dragged at my calves. Exhaustion shook my teeth. A laugh cracked out of me without consent. You explain catastrophe like poetry, I said. Do the dead find that comforting? No, he said simply. They do not find anything. I would like you to continue to find many things. Warmth, sleep, bread, my hand when you choose it. I am bad at begging, Serafina. Do not make me learn. Why? I asked, and there was a child in the question despite me. Because if I beg and you refuse me, he said, and his voice dropped as if afraid of waking something crueler than either of us, I will become someone both of us dislike. The ferryman called again, a single word, not my name but the question that contains all names. Are you coming? The lantern steadied. The boat tugged at its rope, impatient or eager or only bored. I looked past the Alpha King's shoulder at the far bank and imagined my feet on that soil. I imagined anonymity like a cloak. I imagined the moon finding me anyway. I imagined going without the weight of his gaze and discovered that my spine did not straighten in relief. It Bowie. I hated myself for that. I hated the part of me that had wrapped its fingers in the fabric of him and refused to let go even as my mouth shouted and my legs ran and my mind rehearsed the speech I would give the first night I slept in a room with a door that locked from the inside. Let me go, I said again, quieter, the way people ask for things they suspect they do not deserve. He turned the coin over between thumb and forefinger. The wolf's head winked like an idiot star. He placed the coin in my palm without comment and closed my fingers around it with his hand. His hand was warm. My bones noticed. I can, he said. I looked up, startled into hope that made my breath stumble. You can. Yes, he said, almost coolly. I can do many things that will not kill me. This would not. It would only teach me to live with a wound. He leaned in, like a man leaning to hear a confession through a grate. But will it keep you alive, Serafina? Will Ruth's ferryman keep you warm when your lungs refuse to breathe in winter unless someone teaches them how? When the bond drags you to your knees in a street you do not know because you have not learned yet that it is a muscle you may use rather than a yoke you must bear? I will learn, I said stubbornly. He smiled, small and dangerous and unbearably fond. You will, he agreed. You will survive anything you decide to love. He breathed out, and the breath touched my mouth. Decide, then. The river roared. The moon bit her lip behind a cloud. My heart tried to run in place, wild as a thing trapped in a snare. I thought of the ledger. I thought of the girls whose names had been turned to ash to make a line straighter. I thought of the way his hands shook sometimes after returning from a hunt he had not let me see. I thought of the first and only time he had laughed without remembering himself and how I had wanted to hide the sound on my tongue like sugar. The decision did not arrive as a fanfare. It came like a tired animal that has realized the forest is larger than its legs. Take me back, I said, and the words clanged in my chest like war. His lashes lowered, hiding and revealing all at once. The corner of his mouth softened, not with victory, not with relief. with something too complicated to survive a name. He gathered me again, coat around my shoulders, his shoulder under my cheek, a shape my body remembered before I told it to forget. He turned us toward the bank we had come from and walked, the river arguing less with him now, the river perhaps tired of its own insistence. At the shallows he scooped me as if I weighed less than my grief and carried me to the stones. When he set me down, my knees buckled and would have landed me in mud if his hand had not steadied the back of my thigh. Heat BURNED where he touched, a constellation waking. I stood because I had decided to stand. We climbed the bank. The forest breathed again, the small sounds returning like birds to a field after thunder. Behind us the ferryman's lanterns dimmed and then disappeared, either because he had extinguished them or because the trees had closed around us. I did not look back. I was tired of watching things vanish. He shrugged off his coat again and draped it properly this time, buttoning the top 2 buttons with a care that made my throat ache. There, he murmured, as if dressing a child who had wandered into snow. Warmth first, explanations later. I will still ask, I said, and hated the small tremor I heard threading through the words. Good, he said, ask until your voice grows hoarse. I will answer until mine does. We walked. The forest made room. When he reached for my hand, he did not take it. He offered it, palm up, knuckles scarred from a fight he had not told me about. I stared at it for 3 steps and then slid my fingers into his, not because I had forgiven him, not because I loved him, not because the mark burned like a star that would not dim until I did what it wanted. Because the night was cold and I was tired and he was warm and my heart, treacherous in its honesty, wanted to live. His hand closed around mine. Not a shackle. Not quite. A shelter I resented and craved. He bent his head as if listening to something I could not hear. Perhaps he was thanking the gods. Perhaps he was issuing orders silently to men who had followed at a distance, men who would not show their faces because their king did not like witnesses when his voice softened. Perhaps he was telling his wolf to be quiet, to stop pacing the cage of his ribs with delight. We reached the gate where Ivy remembered how to be kindness. He stopped me with a pressure of fingers and then, without show, lifted his free hand and tore the hinge fully free. Metal squealed like a warning given too late. He tossed the hinge into the grass so the earth could busy itself with chewing. No more small doors, he said, as if to himself. If you leave again, take the front. Will you let me? He looked at me and did not pretend. No, he said, but I will stand where you can see me. We passed through into the palace grounds. Dawn had not confessed herself yet, but the birds thought about it and cleared their throats. Servants would wake soon. The kitchens would light their fires. The rooms would fill with footsteps and the measured music of wealth. For this last stretch the world was ours alone, just river on our clothes and a decision drying between us. At the threshold of the palace proper, his hand left mine. I felt the separation like cold fine skin that has been wrapped. He Ned toward me and, with an old-fashioned courtliness that would have embarrassed any other king, bowed his head an inch. Rest, he said, then come to me when the sun is a hand above the trees. We will start with the truth. And after that, if you wish to run again, I will not sleep until I learn how to ask you to stay. I could have laughed then, brittle and bright. I could have told him truth is only another country in which conquering is possible. Instead I nodded, because speech felt extravagant. I stepped inside. The marble whispered against my feet, relieved to have me back, jealous, perhaps, of the mud. The hall smelled like beeswax and old flowers and the memory of a life I had never quite learned how to inhabit. Behind me his presence receded a step and then lingered like heat from a fire after it has been banked. I did not turn. I did not have to. The mark hummed, the way a bird hums in its sleep when it dreams of an open sky and forgets, for one gentled second, the bars. I climbed the stairs, counting, not to calm myself but to promise myself I still could. At my chamber door I paused, hand on the latch, and listened to my own breath. It came and went. It did not break. In the glass inside, I would see a girl with river hair and a man's coat and eyes that had just learned the shape of a new bruise. I would put the locket on the table. I would pour water and it would taste like the river if the river had learned manners. I would sleep on sheets that had watched me fail to sleep for months. I would wake to a hand of sun on the floor and a question standing on the other side of it, dressed in a crown and a name and the terrible patience of love that has decided it will outlast every argument you make to kill it. They said no one escapes the Alpha King alive. They were right, but not in the way they meant. That night I did not die. I learned instead how a cage can be made of arms and how sometimes the only way out is through the part of yourself that still wants to be held. The palace was quieter than it had ever been. Quiet not of peace but of anticipation, like a body that knows it is about to bleed. I woke before dawn, the air still tasting faintly of river mist and iron. The coat he had wrapped around me lay folded at the edge of the bed. I stared at it for a long while, the way one stares at a weapon disguised as mercy. The mark on my collarbone pulsed, soft, rhythmic, the heartbeat of another creature living beneath my skin. When I touched it, heat rippled outward, his warmth, carried through a bond I had not chosen. I whispered, "Stop." The mark did not listen. It never did. I rose and went to the window. The horizon bruised from violet to gray. The palace gardens glimmered with dew and secrets. Somewhere beyond that, the forest waited. Pretending it had forgotten the sound of my footsteps. It hadn't. The trees never forget who runs from them. Servants began to stir below, voices low, cautious, as if afraid to disturb whatever lay sleeping in these walls. I dressed quickly, choosing a simple gown, no jewels, no crown. I wanted to look like someone who could vanish if she tried hard enough. In the mirror, my reflection looked back at me like a stranger pretending to know my name. Her eyes held the storm still trapped in them from last night's river. Her mouth was a wound that refused to heal. I left the chamber without calling for help. My bare feet remembered the path through the corridors, the cold stone, the portraits of kings staring down like witnesses who had sworn to stay silent. The grand doors of the council hall were closed, but I could hear voices seeping through, the deep timbre of the Alpha King's command and the measured fear of those who served him. The sound wrapped around my ribs and made me pause. I shouldn't have stopped. Curiosity is the first chain, and I had worn too many already. "She will not run again," his voice said, calm, absolute. "She has seen the river. She has learned what mercy costs." "Mercy?" a man's voice replied. "A general, I thought?" "Your Majesty, mercy is not what she needs. She is your Luna. She needs reminding of her place." The silence that followed was worse than rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, colder. "Do you presume to know her place better than I?" The air in the corridor thickened. I could almost feel the man's fear bleeding through the walls. "Leave," he said simply, and footsteps scattered like frightened birds. When the doors opened, he stood alone. The morning light fell on him like an apology the world kept trying to offer. His eyes found me instantly, as if the bond had guided them before sight could. He didn't look surprised. He never did. "You're awake," he said, and the words were both question and decree. "I couldn't sleep," I answered, though what I meant was you were still in my head. He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the long table lined with maps and letters. "Then let me show you what keeps me from sleep as well." I hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct screamed to run the other way. But something colder, older, whispered to step forward. He waited, patient as gravity. When I entered, the door closed behind me of its own accord, or maybe by his will. With him, it was hard to tell the difference. Maps covered the table, inked rivers, jagged mountains, villages marked with sigils I didn't recognize. His fingers moved across one of them, tracing borders that meant more to him than any vow. "These are the lands we protect," he said softly. "And the ones that no longer believe the why need protection." I said nothing. My silence was safer than my voice. He continued, "You saw the ledger. You think I am a butcher." His eyes rose to mine. "But what if I told you the wolves who bled those villages were not mine? What if I told you I took the blame to keep my enemies from knowing how weak my pack truly was? Would you expect me to thank you?" I asked. "I would expect you to understand," he said. "Because whether you like it or not, Serafina, the blood that stains my hands also keeps you alive." His words struck harder than any blow. I turned away, unable to bear the way his gaze undressed my thoughts. "You talk about blood as if it's currency," I whispered. "As if lives are numbers you balance to sleep better at night." He stepped closer. "You think I sleep?" His hand brushed my shoulder, light, almost reverent. You think kings dream of peace? I wanted to tell him that monsters dream too, but the words caught behind my teeth. His touch lingered, not demanding, not cruel, simply there. Heat bled through fabric, through skin, through everything I'd built to keep him out. I should have moved away, but I didn't. The scent of pine and steel wrapped around me until the world shrank to the space between our breaths. You shouldn't have followed me into the river, I said finally. He leaned close enough for his whisper to slide along my throat. And you shouldn't have looked back, he murmured. You always do. I stepped away then, breaking whatever fragile spell his presence wove. Why keep me here if you don't trust me? I asked. Why not lock me away or end this bond if it torments you so much? Because, he said, if I break it, the bond dies with you. The room tilted. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. What? He didn't move, didn't blink. Your power was never meant to be separate from mine. The mark binds us beyond flesh. If I cut it, your heart will follow. The words fell between us like stones into water, ripples of horror, disbelief, something darker. I stared at him, waiting for a smirk, a cruel smile, any sign that this was another of his games. But his face was carved from sorrow. He wasn't lying. You tied me to you, I whispered. Not to protect me, to own me. He looked at me then with eyes that had seen too much. I tied you to me because the world wanted to own us both. Silence bloomed, wide and heavy. I turned away before he could see the tears forming, walked to the window where sunlight finally touched the glass. Outside, the world looked too beautiful to belong to men like him, or women like me. If I'm bound to you, I said quietly, then let me walk beside you, not behind. He didn't answer right away. The pause was long enough to make my heart falter. Then his footsteps approached, slow. Deliberate. Beside me, he repeated, voice low. You would have to see everything. The blood, the lies, the crown without its gold. His hand brushed my hair back from my shoulder, fingers grazing the mark that pulsed faintly beneath my skin. You would have to wear the truth and not look away. I already don't, I said. Something broke in his eyes then, something that had been holding him upright for far too long. Then stand with me, he said. For one day. If you still wish to run after that, I'll show you where the gates are myself. I wanted to laugh, to call him cruel, manipulative, arrogant. But there was no cruelty in his voice, only exhaustion. Only a king tired of being the monster his crown demanded. Against every piece of sense I had left, I nodded. He exhaled, a sound between relief and disbelief. Then the hunt is over, he said softly. But I knew better. The hunt had only changed shape. It was no longer about escape. It was about survival inside the cage that called itself a kingdom. And perhaps, somewhere between his darkness and my defiance, one of us would finally learn what it meant to be free. Morning hardened into a blade and the palace offered its neck as if this were the ritual it had always been built for. I walked beside him because I had said I would, and the corridor that had once felt like a throat closing now felt like a road I had chosen. Choosing did not make it easier. It only made the wait mine. We did not speak as we moved through the first doors and into the war chambers. The guards' eyes flicked between us with the awe people reserve for storms they have learned to name. On the table lay the same maps I had seen at dawn, but now small wooden markers had multiplied like seeds dropped in a field. Each piece was painted, the black of our banner, the gray of the northern packs who would not bend, the rust red of rogues who wore no allegiance but blood. He stopped at the edge and waited until every voice in the room decided to be quiet. Authority is not volume, I thought, watching the silence fall around him like a cloak. You will address her as you address me, he said, and I felt the room recoil as if struck, not by insult, but by the sudden rearrangement of gravity. His gaze did not leave the map. Begin. A messenger with dawn still on his hair stepped forward, eyes half lifted, the way a man looks at the sun when he must. Sire, the border hamlets report fresh tracks, heavy, too many for a hunting party. The scent is muddied. Someone has taught them to mask. Rogues, one of the generals muttered. Or worse. Worse? I asked, and the man flinched like a hound caught on the wrong side of a door. The king's fingers brushed a line of river no wider than a vein. His voice stayed even. There are wolves. who broke away from every oath long before my reign, he said, as if reading me a story that did not want to be told. They don't hunt for territory or hunger. They hunt because it pleases whatever god they think listens. And we tolerate them? I was surprised by my own anger. It made my voice brighter than the room deserved. We mislead them, he said. We bleed for the places they want until they think there is nothing left. A bitter laugh rose in me and silenced itself against my teeth. So the ledger, he agreed, the admission clean, unadorned. He placed one fingertip on a cluster of gray tokens. Here, 3 nights ago, they ran the pines above Hollowmere until the moon lost patience. He looked up, not at me, but through me, the way men look when they are remembering the worst thing that still obeys their call. I held the line with 9 men. We left with 6. I thought of those 6 and the 3 who did not come home and of the names that would become neat black letters and could not find a place in me where that became simple. I touched the edge of the table, as if the wood might steady me. Why didn't you tell me? His mouth tipped, not a smile, not quite sorrow. Because I needed you to sleep, he said, and there was no defense I could mount against the tenderness of that lie. The room shifted. He dismissed the messenger with a nod that held more grace than a bow. Others reported, stores moved, treaties tested, a coven to the south who had begun to speak in the old way about tithes and tribute. Each time, the king's answers were not clever, they were solid. Bread for the villages that would winter lean. Timber rights traded for silence. Scouts sent where he knew they would see enough to be scared and not enough to be dead. He did not look at me again until the final voice swallowed itself and the room was empty except for the shape of decisions made. Walk with me, he said, and I did, down a narrow stair the courtiers pretended didn't exist, into a stone hall where the air tasted of iron and rain. It could have been a memory of the river if the river had been built by hands. At the end, a door of oak older than the palace opened to his touch. I had never seen this room. Of course I had not. Queens are not given keys to the oldest truths. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves held boxes, and the boxes held letters tied with twine. Some twine was new, some had rotted into threads that barely pretended to hold. In the center, on a slab of dark wood, lay an open volume written in a hand too steady to be anyone's but his. He did not move toward it. He watched me see it. What is this place? I asked, though I knew. We all know altars when we find them. The promise room, he said softly. Ever. Why vow my crown has made that did not fit on the council's clean paper. I looked at the boxes the way one looks at graves. I wanted them to be full of victories I could wear like jewels. I wanted them to be failures bound so tightly the shame could not leak. I stepped closer to the slab and read the page without touching it. A farmer's plea for his son's life after a border skirmish. A midwife's report of a fever in the east. A note in a child's round hand asking why the king's men had taken her mother when there was still bread on the table. Beneath each, a reply. Some in his hand, some in others. The replies were short. We are sending medicine. We will return her by summer. We cannot bring back the son, but we have taken the hand that took him. I wanted to hate the economy of it. I failed. Do they always believe you? I asked. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes I believe myself. And the rest? He met my eyes. I keep the letters anyway. I walked along the shelves, reading names to myself like prayers. I did not realize I had begun to tremble until his coat, another, the twin of the one I had abandoned on the bed, settled around my shoulders. I nearly shrugged it off. Instead I let it weigh me into the present. I didn't bring you here to humble you, he said. Or to ask forgiveness. Then why? So you would know what you are marrying. He paused. Have married. I turned, coat pulling at my collarbones. Am I marrying this room, I asked, or the man who keeps it hidden? Both, he said, and his voice carried the simple cruelty of truth. I cannot give you a crown without showing you the bruise it leaves. I thought of the girl I had been, whose hands smelled like milk and old books, who believed the mark would be an honor if only I learned how to sacrifice beautifully. I thought of the woman who had run to the river and watched it expose every tender thing I still wanted. You could have brought me sooner. You were still learning how to sleep through the night without waking the palace with your nightmares. He was not ashamed of knowing. I hated him for the part of me that was grateful. I waited. And if I had not waited? If I had kept running? His mouth curved and steadied. Then I would have brought you anyway, he said, because truth is kinder than the stories you make when you are alone. I wanted to argue. I had a lifetime's practice. Instead I moved to the open book and, with a finger that shook more than I allowed anyone to see, I turned the page. A new letter. The seal broken cleanly and kept. The handwriting elegant, feminine, impatient. A duchess complaining that my appearance at a summer festival had caused whispers. The note below was short and in his hand. Let them whisper, it read. It teaches them how. Me led despite myself. He saw it and something inside him eased the way muscle eases when the blade is finally drawn free. We left the promise room. He closed the door, and for an instant, his palm rested on the wood with something like reverence. When he looked at me again, the strange softness had sharpened back into command, not because I was his subject, but because the day required a king. There is one more truth, he said. It is the one you will hate most. Then say it. He led me up a spiral stair into light that had learned to pour, and we emerged on the outer battlements where wind tore at hair and words in equal measure. The forest lay below, and beyond it the smear of the nearest town, roofs like folded hands. He stood with his hands on the stone as if holding up the sky. The bond, he said. It was not only the moon's doing. He waited for the pain to find me. It did, slow and complete. What did you do? I asked, he said. And I was answered. He did not dress it in ritual. He did not excuse it with prophecy. The night you were marked, I spoke old words that my father taught me and his father taught him. They bind Luna to Alpha when the world grows too hungry for monarchy, when men without crowns decide they deserve the world more than those who have learned how to bear it. It makes the bond harder to break. And crueler to keep. Crueler to keep. The wind tasted of salt though there was no sea. You made a cage, I said, and my voice was very quiet, because rage this clean does not roar. It freezes and becomes something sharp enough to cut stone. I made a lock on a door I planned to guard with my life, he answered. I did not account for the way you'd look at me through it. Something broke then, not between us, but behind my ribs. The sound of it felt like relief and grief shaking hands. You ask me to stand beside you. You show me your wounds. Then you admit you made mine deeper. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were not the eyes of the Alpha King. They were a man's eyes at the end of a long road. I am not asking for absolution, he said. I am asking you to decide with all the information I should have given you before I asked you to wear my crown. What if I decide against you? He turned his face into the wind as if it were the only judge he recognized. Then I will teach you how to live with a piece of me missing, he said. And I will learn to live with the same. We stood within an arm's length and did not touch. The distance felt wider than any river. Below us, the courtyard began to stir, laughter, the clang of a bucket, a song half remembered the way a people remember their courage. If I took a step, if I reached, the world would tilt one way forever. If I turned and walked away, it would tilt the other. What would it look like, I asked, if we were not a prison to each other? His answer came without hesitation. It would look like you telling me where we are cruel without flinching. It would look like me listening and choosing the braver road even when it costs me men who call me weak. It would look like you leaving rooms when I become the version of myself I hate and me following you into the dark until I remember who I promised to be. A breath. It would look like you saying no and me learning to make room for it. The simplicity of it made something savage inside me lie down. And the bond? We teach it to be a language instead of a leash, he said. It has always listened when you spoke. It has only obeyed me because I was louder. The wind shoved my hair across my mouth. I pushed it back and finally looked at him without my anger between us like a shield. In the mark beneath my skin, a warmth gathered, not command, not heat that demanded a shape, but an echo. He was right. It listened when I spoke. I had spent so long cursing it that I had forgotten to teach it how to carry me without devouring me. Then listen, I said to it, to him, to the old words that had stitched this fate into ours. If I stay, it is because I choose to. Not because a god prefers his entertainment messy. The warmth answered with a hum small as a moth's wing. He did not move closer. He did not even smile. Relief moved through him like dusk. Then come with me to Hollowmere, he said. See what I am when I am not wearing a crown. See what it costs to stop men who enjoy breaking things no one will count. I will not be your alibi, I warned. I am not asking you to be my witness, he said, and the distinction settled like a cloak that fit. I am asking you to be my conscience. We left the battlements. The palace gathered around us again, heavy and bright and full of its own ghosts. In the courtyard, horses stamped and tossed their manes, breath fogging the air. He chose a black mare whose eyes reminded me of rain caught in stone. I chose a gray with a scar down her flank. I pressed my palm to her neck, and she turned and exhaled against my wrist as if recognizing a girl who once loved small mercies. As we rode out, the gates opened slow and solemn, like lips moving around a prayer. People stepped aside, and their eyes followed us the way people watch omens they have not decided to fear or adore. He did not reach for my hand. I did not offer it. The bond lay between us, quiet as a blade laid carefully back in its sheath. The forest accepted us. The trees had not forgotten my flight. They rustled with a memory that was part warning, part welcome. Sunlight shattered itself through leaves and slid across his shoulders, across mine. For a long while, there was only the rhythm of hooves and the honest work of breath. I remembered what it felt like to move towards something rather than away. At the first river, the small one that braided the road like a child's game, we slowed. The crossing stones were slick with green. He went first and looked back as the mare found her footing. I watched his mouth soften and knew without needing to hear it that he was saying a thank you to something unnamed. I did not ask which. By midday, the pines thinned, and Hollowmere's ridge lifted its dark head. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys only, thin as thread. Fields lay in uneven squares, some newly plowed, some left to grief. He raised a hand, and our escort fell back like a tide receding from a shore it respected. We entered alone. They saw him and they did not kneel. They did not run. A woman with a red scarf came forward, jaw set, child on her hip, the child's eyes already the color of suspicion. She looked at me first, and the look was both knife and question. I looked back, willing my spine to carry her gaze like a standard. You've come to Countess, she said to him, not bothering with titles. I've come to ask what you need, he said. Bread, she said. Time. Men who kill the wolves that come at night and laugh while they do it. We'll give you the third, he said. The first 2 belong to the gods. She snorted and shifted the child higher. Then tell your gods to move faster. He looked at me then, not for permission, not for counsel, but to witness the exchange the way one witnesses vows. I nodded. He turned back to the woman and removed his gloves. His hands were scarred, older than his face. He offered one. I am the man responsible for the slowness, he said. Hate me now and spare your throat later. She stared at his hand and did not take it. I don't have time to hate, she said. I have fields and hungry mouths and a bed that used to hold a second body. He lowered his hand and did not flinch. Then I will send men who can make the nights quieter, he said. And I will sleep less until your day is longer. Something in her gaze cracked, not kindness, but something that allowed breath to enter more easily. She looked at me again. And you? She demanded. What is a queen's work in a place like this? I dismounted and felt the ground answer my weight. I stepped close enough that the child could reach for my hair if he wished. He did not. He regarded me with solemnity older than both of us. To remember, I said. And to bite. The woman's mouth startled into a smile. Bite who? Anything that tries to make a ledger of you, I said. The king's breath left him like a quiet laugh or a wound learning it can heal. The woman shifted her grip and let her shoulders drop, just enough. Then bite quickly, she said. Night comes earlier here. We stayed until the light tore itself ragged on the edge of the fields and the first cold finger of evening touched the well. He listened, and I watched him listen. When he lied, it was only to the stars that wanted promises no man should make. When he told the truth, it was like laying stones across a river one by one until someone could cross without wetting their shoes. The bond thrummed when he grew furious and stilled when he mastered it. Twice, he turned away to breathe, and I stood at his shoulder the way a wall stands, useful, unmoving, full of its own quiet. The villagers began to speak to me as if I had always been there. They told me the names of their dead without asking me to carry them. I carried them anyway. We rode back in the blue hour. The forest grew its night face again and did not attempt to frighten me. At the river, I did not look down at the water's black mouth. I looked at his hand on the reins and the clean line of his wrist and the ink stain at the base of his thumb where he had signed something when I was not looking. I thought of the promise room and the battlements and the old words that made cages of tender things. When the palace rose ahead, gold-tipped and grave, I felt the choice approach like weather. He slowed and so did I, and in the hush where our horses breathed the same fog, I reached across the distance that had been the day and placed my fingers over his, not to be led, not to be held, but to say, I am still here. His hand turned beneath mine, palm to palm. No triumph, no plea, only the truth he had promised and the truth I had learned to ask for. When we crossed through the gates, the mark at my collarbone warmed and did not burn. It felt, for the first time, like a door I could open from my side. Night folded itself around the palace like a shroud stitched with stars, and I could feel the hum of the place settling, the creak of beams, the long sigh of hallways remembering all they'd seen. We returned in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy with anger but full of thoughts still shaping their teeth. The guards bowed as the gates closed behind us. I watched their eyes flicker from me to him, a quiet understanding passing through ranks and ribs alike. The queen had gone where queens don't go, and the king had let her return. The horses were led away. The courtyard emptied. He reached to unfasten my cloak, and I caught his hand before he could. I can do it. The words were small but they steadied the air. He let go without argument, and that permission, so simple, so unremarkable, felt like the first breath after drowning. Inside, torches burned lower, their light trembling against stone. The palace at night was another creature entirely, its grandeur stripped to bone, its corridors whispering the old language of ghosts and promises. My steps echoed soft as thought. His echoed like the pulse of something patient. We passed the library, its doors ajar. I hesitated. The scent of old parchment and cedar pulled at me like a thread tied to a memory. I want to see it, I said. He paused mid-stride, then turned, the flicker of torchlight catching the corner of his mouth. Then see it. Inside, dust danced like tiny moons. Shelves climbed toward darkness, books pressed close as secrets. I trailed my fingers along the spines, reading titles half lost to time. Chronicles, hymns, treaties. Histories that smoothed war into poetry. He followed but kept his distance, letting the space between us breathe. I used to come here as a girl, I said. Before everything. I know, he murmured. You'd sit by the west window. The servants told me. They said you read aloud to the birds. I thought words could keep them near, I said. I thought if I spoke them softly enough, even wild things would stay. Did they? For a while. I turned to look at him. But wild things always go back to the sky. His gaze held mine, unflinching. And yet here you are. Here I am, I said, and turned away before he could read what trembled under it. On the table near the window lay a half-open book, its page illuminated by the faint spill of moonlight. The ink shimmered faintly, not black but silvered, old enough that the words seemed carved rather than written. I bent closer and read. When the moon tires of her throne, she seeks the wolf's breath to remember her own wild. It was a fragment from the oldest songs of our people, one I'd heard once as a child, half whispered by my mother before she'd vanished from court life like smoke leaving a candle. I felt my throat tighten. You kept her stories, I said. He nodded once. She taught me what it meant to lead before I knew how to wear a crown. I could not destroy her words, even when others tried. I stared at the page, the script shimmering faintly. She believed love could undo a curse. She was wrong, he said quietly. Love feeds curses, makes them beautiful enough to endure. I looked up sharply. Do you believe that? He stepped closer, the air between us rippling with something I couldn't name. I believe beauty has teeth. And sometimes we mistake the bite for affection. The room pulsed with quiet. Outside, a wolf howled, distant, mournful, familiar. The sound traveled through me, echoing in the mark under my collarbone until my skin felt too small to hold it. His voice dropped to a whisper. Do you hear it too? Yes. It's one of ours, he said. They guard the forest edge now. But sometimes they sing for the ones who've lost their way. Then they. Re-singing for me, I said before I could stop myself. He shook his head. They're singing for the moon. You just happen to wear her light. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss the ache curling in my chest, but his words left no room for mockery. I moved to the window and pressed my hand against the glass. The moon hung low and gold, its reflection trembling in my palm. I used to think she was lonely, I said. That's why she kept calling the wolves. And now? Now I think she just wanted someone to understand her silence. He came to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, close enough that the air itself felt alive. You think I don't understand silence? He said. I've lived my whole life in its teeth. Then why do you fill it with commands? Because if I stop speaking, I hear everything I've lost. There it was, the truth buried in all his power. I turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes were not the fire I'd always feared, they were the color of the forest just before rain, holding too much history to burn. I don't know how to forgive you, I said. I haven't asked you to. Then why show me this side of you? Because pretending has exhausted me. He looked down, his hand flexing once at his side. And because I am terrified that one day you'll stop seeing me at all. The honesty in his voice broke something I hadn't realized was still whole. I wanted to be cruel, to remind him what he'd done, to build a wall of words high enough that neither of us could climb it. But cruelty requires certainty, and I had none left. Only exhaustion and the faint, maddening pull of the bond between us, a thread woven of pain and recognition. I took a step closer. And if I did stop seeing you? He smiled without warmth. Then I would know what it feels like to die while still breathing. Silence filled the room again, but it was different this time, not sharp, not cold, just waiting. The candles guttered low. The light painted the hollows of his face, softened them into something almost human. Tomorrow, he said at last, we ride to the border again. I want you to see what we fight for when we call it peace. I nodded. And if what I see isn't peace at all? Then you'll tell me, he said. And I'll listen. He turned to leave, but before he crossed the threshold, he paused. The wolves will keep singing tonight, he said. If you can't sleep, go to the balcony. Sometimes they answer back when the Luna calls. The door closed behind him with the gentleness of a promise. I stood for a long time, the echo of his footsteps fading into the bones of the palace. The air smelled of parchment and pine, of old ink and the faint trace of him. When I finally stepped onto the balcony, the world below was quiet but not empty. The wind carried whispers through the trees, and in the distance, the wolves began again, their voices weaving through the dark like a prayer too ancient to translate. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash through me. The mark on my skin pulsed once, a slow heartbeat. For the first time, it didn't burn. It glowed, warm, steady, alive. I didn't know if it was the moon answering, or him, or something older than both of us. Maybe the wild things weren't gone after all. Maybe they were only waiting for me to remember their song. Dawn came like a secret, slow and uncertain, the kind of light that slipped through the world as though it feared being noticed. When I opened my eyes, the palace still held its breath, wrapped in the quiet that belongs to those moments before purpose returns. The sheets were cool. His scent lingered, pine, smoke, iron. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I didn't notice. Lies have a rhythm, and I'd learned how to dance to them. Outside, the world was waking. I could hear the rustle of soldiers in the courtyard below, the soft clatter of harness and steel, the low murmur of horses restless with waiting. The Alpha King never left unprepared, and the land never let him leave unnoticed. I dressed in silence, choosing the simplest of my garments, a dark cloak, sturdy boots, gloves that could hide the tremor in my hands. Queens were not supposed to tremble, but queens were also not supposed to love their captors. The mirror caught me as I turned. My reflection looked composed, but my eyes gave me away. They were too alive, too aware. He was already waiting when I descended the steps. The morning mist coiled around him, turning his figure half myth, half man. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. His eyes found me, steady and unflinching, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if this was how the moon felt when the tide rose to meet her, drawn, defiant, doomed. You're late, he said softly. I needed to remember who I was before I met you. And did you? No, I admitted. She's gone. Something flickered across his face, something like regret, something like pride. He offered me his hand, not as a king to a queen, but as a man offering a choice. I didn't take it. I walked past him and mounted my horse alone. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurt more than any cruelty. The ride began in silence. The forest greeted us like an old friend, watchful, ancient, unwilling to forgive. Birds stirred in the high branches, their calls threading through the mist like small, delicate truths. The path wound through shadows, and I realized that the world looked different beside him now. Not smaller, not brighter, just heavier. Hours passed. The sun climbed, and with it came the smell of wet soil, the promise of our ain, the hum of distant thunder. Every sound felt sharpened, the snort of the horses, the creak of leather, his breath just behind me. Finally, he broke the silence. Do you know what I see when I look at this land? I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to betray curiosity. He continued anyway. I see ghosts. Every tree, every river, every field has one. Not the kind that wail. The kind that remember. He glanced at me then. Do you believe places remember? Yes, I said quietly. Because I've never managed to forget one. He looked away, a small nod acknowledging the weight of my words. We reached a clearing near the foothills where the forest gave way to open ground. Smoke rose from the distance, a thin, gray thread curling toward the sky. The smell of it caught in my throat. It wasn't the scent of hearth fires or bread baking. It was ruin. He slowed his horse, gaze fixed on the horizon. They burned another village. I felt the chill crawl up my spine. The rogues? He nodded. They move faster now. They've learned how to strike before we can scent them. There was something else in his voice, something that sounded dangerously close to helplessness. I'd never thought I'd hear that from him. We rode closer, and the world turned to ash. Houses were little more than skeletons, blackened ribs against a gray sky. The air stung my lungs. I dismounted before he could stop me, walking among the ruins. There was no sound but the wind whispering through broken beams. A child's toy lay in the dirt, a carved wooden wolf, half burned, one ear missing. I picked it up, brushing the soot away with trembling fingers. They didn't even take what they came for, I murmured. They came for fear, he said behind me. And they took it. I turned. Then why haven't you stopped them? He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. Because every time I kill one, 3 more rise. Because for every man I save, another decides I am the monster they need to blame. I stepped closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. And what if they're right? He didn't flinch. Then at least I will be a monster who protects what he loves. The air between us burned. I should have walked away. I should have left him to his kingdom of smoke and sorrow. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, and what is it you love? He looked at me as if the question itself was a wound. You already know. I closed my eyes, hating the way those words rooted themselves in me like vines. When I opened them, the sky had darkened. Storm clouds rolled across the mountains, heavy and gray. Thunder cracked like the sound of the world remembering its rage. The first drops of rain fell, soft, tentative. I lifted my face to the sky and let it wash tea. He ash from my skin. The Alpha King stepped closer, close enough that the rain gathered on his lashes and slid down his jaw. You shouldn't be out here, he said. Neither should you. I'm not leaving you. The words were quiet but final, the way a vow sounds before it becomes a curse. I turned to him, rain running down my face like tears I refused to shed. I don't need you to save me. His hand rose, not to touch me, but to hover near my cheek, caught between desire and restraint. Maybe not, he said. But I need to try. The sky broke open then. Rain came hard and relentless. Around us, the fire's last smoke was beaten down into mud. He reached for my hand, slow enough for me to pull away if I wished. I didn't. The contact was electric, fire and ice and memory. The bond between us hummed, awakening like a creature that had slept too long. I felt its pulse in my throat, in my chest, in the space where my defiance used to live. His eyes locked on mine. Tell me to let go, he said, voice trembling just slightly. I couldn't. Tell me, he whispered, and I will. But I said nothing. I only stood there in the rain, my hand caught in his, lightning painting the world white for a heartbeat at a time. The silence between us was the kind that builds cathedrals or graves. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely more than breath. You should never have found me that night by the river. He smiled, sad and certain. You ran so I could. The storm swallowed everything after that. The world, our words, the ghosts of the burned village. And in the center of it, beneath the roaring sky, the Alpha King and his Luna stood hand in hand, bound by something older than either of them could destroy. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It was something far more dangerous. It was understanding. The morning after the storm felt impossibly gentle, as if the world itself had chosen to forgive. The smoke had lifted, leaving only the faint sweetness of wet earth and the promise of sunlight waiting behind the clouds. The ruins of the village shimmered with dew instead of ash, every blade of grass tipped in silver. The air smelled of rebirth. We had stayed through the night, tending to what was left, patching wounds, burying the dead, holding the living until they stopped shaking. He had not worn his crown once. He'd carried water, torn cloth for bandages, and murmured words that no one would ever write in a history book. And I, for the first time, saw the man, not the Alpha King, not the legend people feared. Now, as the first light broke across the horizon, he found me standing by the river that curved just beyond the fields. The same river that had once almost claimed me. Today, it was calm, the surface glinting gold. I bent to touch the water, and He touched me back, soft, forgiving. "You look different when you're not running from me," he said behind me. I didn't turn. Maybe I was never running from you. Maybe I was running from the part of myself that loved you. His footsteps approached slowly, deliberate, the way you approach a wild thing you're afraid to startle. "And what do you see now?" I turned to face him. Someone who stopped pretending he's only darkness. He smiled, truly smiled, and the world seemed to exhale. "And you?" I stopped pretending I was only light. For a while, we simply looked at each other. The bond between us, once a chain of fire, now felt like a thread of silk, soft, alive, breathing with us. There was no heat, no pull, no command. Just connection, equal and quiet. "I thought I had to break this to be free," I said. But maybe freedom was learning how to hold it without fear. He reached for my hand then, slow and careful. "I never deserved you." "Maybe not," I said, stepping closer. "But you learned." He let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "I don't know what comes after this." "Then we'll find out." The sun finally tore through the last of the clouds, washing the world in gold. Birds began to sing, first one, then a chorus. The villagers who had survived started to emerge from their homes, faces lifted toward the light. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. It was a sound I hadn't heard in too long. He turned to look at them, his jaw tightening the way it always did when he tried to hide emotion. "They'll need rebuilding. Fields, houses, hope. And you'll help them," I said. "And you'll make sure I do it right." I smiled. "Of course." He hesitated, then looked at me with that same softness I'd seen only once before, when he'd found me in the river. "Will you stay?" The question landed between us like a heartbeat. I thought of all the ways I could answer. Of leaving, of freedom, of peace. But I also thought of the man before me, the one who had walked through fire and guilt and blood and still stood asking, not demanding. "I'll stay," I said. "But not as your prisoner. Not as your possession." He nodded. "Then as what?" "As your equal." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "Then I am the luckiest king who ever lived." He lifted my hand and pressed his lips to my fingers, not in ownership, but in reverence. The mark between us pulsed once, bright as sunlight on water, and then it dimmed, still there, but softer now, like a song fading into peace. The villagers gathered near the riverbank, their faces open, cautious, curious. I saw the same woman from before, the one with the red scarf and the child on her hip. She smiled at me this time. A real smile, the kind that carried trust. I smiled back. The Alpha King turned to his peep. Lan spoke, his voice clear and steady. "The kingdom rebuilds today, not with fear, not with chains, but with choice." Then he glanced at me, and his eyes softened. "And with love, if we are brave enough to keep it." He stepped back, letting the crowd's cheer rise like the first breath of spring. For once, he didn't try to lead it. He simply let it happen. I watched him in that moment, the man who had been my captor, my torment, my salvation, and realized that sometimes, fate doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need to become who you were meant to be. The river shimmered, reflecting the sky's awakening. I looked up at the moon, pale and fading in the daylight, and whispered to her, "You were right. Wild things don't belong in cages. They build their own kingdoms." He came to stand beside me, our hands brushing lightly. Not possession, not promise, just presence. The simplest, truest form of love. And for the first time since the night I ran, I wasn't afraid. The Alpha King's hand found mine, warm and steady, and together we turned toward the village, the new beginning, the new dawn, and walked forward, no crown, no chains, no ghosts between us. Only the sun, rising for both.